It's my pleasure to welcome our three panellists this morning, who each bring to this discussion quite diverse experiences. I'll start introducing Jennie, who's one of the 5 administrators of Destroy the Joint, Australia's largest online women's activist group. Destroy the Joint is run by volunteers and was set up in 2012 to combat the increasing sexism aimed at high-profile Australian women by the media. Thank you, Alan Jones, amongst others. And Gail's made the point very well this morning. Destroy the Joint works to support gender equality and civil discourse across many important issues, including men's violence against women. Jennie's a qualified teacher on special education and has spent the last 20 years operating a non-profit organisation, providing advanced driver training programs for young drivers, with a particular focus on the sexism faced by women and girls in the driving field. She lectures around Australia and internationally on driving issues and is the author of 2 books for young drivers and their parents. Welcome, Jennie. Next, I'd like to introduce Joanne Mulcahy, who's the Executive Manager, Communications, Strategic Advocacy and Customer Service at Yarra City Council. Catchy title. As the Chair of Yarra's Gender Equity Committee, Joanne helped develop Yarra's first employee gender equity strategy, which champions a respectful, just and fair workplace and the prevention of violence against women. Joanne's career spans 20 years in the local government management positions at Yarra, Kingston and Whitehorse councils, as well as some years consulting across the sector. Welcome, Joanne. And lastly, but certainly not least, Rosie Batty. I'm going to try and get through this. Rosie stood before Australia's media the day after the violent murder of her son and spoke courageously, carefully and calmly on family violence. She has continued to speak with clarity on the issues, working to lift awareness, understanding and ultimately bring an end to this violence against women and children. Fiona McCormick from DV Vic says of Rosie that she's somebody who exemplifies what women go through and who people have listened to, because when she speaks out about this, it's the voice of experience. She's measured, ethical, credible, and she's a voice that's respected, and she's done an amazing job of shifting attitudes and focusing on this issue. Oh, sorry. Maybe that'll make me a little less nervous. I want to also quote from Victoria Police Commissioner Kellie, who'll be joining us later. He's acknowledged the power of what he refers to as the Rosie Batty factor, and it was his nomination that saw her receive the Pride of Australia Award earlier this week for courage. And this morning was announced as a nominee for this year's Australian of the Year. Okay, to get us started, I've been given a quote to read out to set the scene from Natasha Stott-Despoja, who's Australia's Ambassador for Women and Girls and the inaugural chair of the National Foundation to Prevent Violence Against Women and Their Children, or Our Watch, that we heard Paul and Ossia and Emily yesterday, and Teresa as well from Our Watch. Natasha says, research shows us there's a strong link between violence against women and how individuals, communities and societies as a whole view the roles of men and women. We face the challenge of embedding in our culture a lived reality of respectful and equal relationships between women and men. It's about a society that values the contributions that women make to relationships, to families and kinships, communities and businesses, the economy, entrepreneurship, spiritual and public and political life. And it's about governments, corporates and businesses making these contributions possible through policy, regulation, strategy, leadership and by example. These are the public actions that create a culture that respects women in our streets, our workplaces, communities and at homes. So Jennie, can I start with you and ask you to share some reflections in relation to that quote from Natasha?
Thank you. Destroy the Joint is an online feminist community with 46,000 members, and we're growing all the time. We post twice every day on women's issues, from gender pay gap to asylum seeker women, from women disadvantaged in tech fields to street harassment, from breastfeeding to body image. However, violence against women is our biggest focus, especially since we started our Counting Dead Women campaign some months ago, and during which time we've highlighted the deaths of 56 women in Australia so far this year, as most of you would know.
Wow.
I'm not an expert in domestic violence, but I have, during 2 years with Destroy the Joint, unwittingly and somewhat unwillingly become an expert observer of how many people see women. Put simply, it's not pretty. So-called ordinary people post on our threads, sometimes hundreds a day, in response to our posts, so we get to see the nuts and bolts of what they really think. The main thing we see is that the problems women face are entrenched and many-faceted. Many people don't understand the problems caused when women are valued only by how they look, and when people think it's okay to tell women how to behave, what to wear, and how they are permitted to control their own bodies. We clearly see how the way society demeans girls leads into how they feel about themselves as adults. We also see how women are blamed for their own assaults and deaths in ways that men are not, how society cares about the deaths of young men and shark attack victims more than women in their own homes, and how outspoken women are hated as outspoken men are not. However, as well as watching the misunderstandings of ordinary, although misguided people, we also see the dark underbelly of misogyny in the trolls who constantly attack our page. There seem to be a certain percentage of men who truly hate women and who find feminism and equality unbearably threatening. The mild end of this behaviour is when men tell us to get back in the kitchen or make them a sandwich, or just call us hairy lefty lesbians, as if that's some kind of insult. The middle ground is occupied by men who feel so threatened by us that they constantly pop up on threads to derail and mansplain conversations, mainly to tell everyone that not all men are violent and that women can be violent too. Yes, we know. And at the extreme end are the specific and nasty threats we receive from the truly vile people. The hijacking of our website, the organised attacks by groups of international trolls requiring all 24 of our moderators on deck, sometimes at 3 a.m, to rebuild the page, and the regular posting of disgusting and offensive material designed solely to horrify and demoralise us. We don't know why or how some men act like this towards women, but we do see that we need to shine a light on the behaviour. Dark things flourish in dark places. So we see our mission as being to raise awareness of violence and to educate about the depth of the issues and their possible solutions. We also see our mission as being to agitate for much more funding to be applied to the issue. In fact, our biggest post of the last 2 years occurred last week when we posted a meme questioning why our government is spending $500 million on a nebulous terrorist threat while closing women's shelters. The meme was shared more than 3,000 times and seen by more than 300,000 people so far. Online campaigning is a new weapon in the fight against violence towards women, but we hope it's a useful adjunct to the hard work being done elsewhere. On behalf of the 5 administrators, 24 moderators and 46,000 destroyers who make up Destroy the Joint, we're proud of the chance to try to contribute. Thanks.
Can I just say, in addition to Jennie working full-time, she spends around 30 hours voluntarily on Destroy the Joint each week. So it's quite a commitment. Yeah. Jo, do you want to go next?
Yes, thank you. How does it work? I don't know. How does it work? Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Hi, I'm Jo Mulcahy. I'm here, quite humble here today to be here with Jennie, Rosie and Kellie, really just to share a little bit about the journey that we've been on at Yarra City Council with our internal gender equity strategy. I just want to quickly mention, does anybody not know where Yarra City Council is? I'm just going to quickly tell you it's an inner city Melbourne council about 80,000 residents. Yarra is a wonderful place to work because it really wears its heart on its sleeve in terms of having strong values for social justice, equity, well-being, sustainability and advocacy. And it's in the role of advocacy that I'm here today to talk to you about Yarra City Council's advocacy in terms of gender equity. At Yarra, we believe that gender equity and the prevention of violence against women is of critical importance. So last November, we started on a journey. In fact, I shouldn't say November, it was 18 months prior to that. We actually launched our gender equity strategy in November, but the journey started at least 18 months prior to that, when a group of staff said we actually need to start embedding gender equity into our policies and practices at Yarra. And in fact, we hadn't done that in the past. So the gender equity strategy over a period of time was developed by staff for staff. It had a shared vision that all staff should have access and enjoy the same rights, responsibilities, resources and opportunities regardless of gender. Our aim has been to embed gender equity, as I mentioned before, in the principles and practices throughout the organisation. We want staff to feel respected, valued and safe, and we want to help them achieve health and wellbeing. The focus of the gender equity strategy, and I'm not sure if other councils have developed their own gender equity strategy. Many councils have developed a gender equity strategy that looks externally. We do have an external focus, but this strategy predominantly talks about the organisation and our staff. And the focus is very much, as I mentioned, at the policy planning and service delivery areas. So our goals are to ensure that gender is considered in all planning and policy, which I've talked about. Representation of women in leadership is prioritised. So on an executive of 8, we have 2 women leaders. I'm one of them, and the CEO is the other. So you can see it's imbalanced, and in fact, out of a leadership of 20 managers, there's 4 women managers. Pay differences based on gender are eliminated. Workplace flexibility is clearly defined, communicated and applied to all equally. The workplace is designed around people, not the other way around. Gender bias across the organisation is addressed, and all employees are equally able to pursue professional development opportunities. I do want to mention that one of the key actions in the gender equity strategy was developing, in cooperation with our staff, a family violence leave entitlement clause in the latest enterprise agreement. And that includes 20 days family violence leave for all staff, the development of a family violence organisational policy, which raises awareness and understanding of the issues of family violence, provides a clear and consistent response for staff when experiencing or responding to family violence disclosures in the workplace, and provides commitment for a safe and supportive workplace for all Yarra employees. In addition to this, and I know I need to wrap up quickly, we're also putting in place council family violence contact officers who will provide advice and referral and support for staff who may be experiencing family violence, and we'll be providing family violence training for all staff across the organisation, starting with our leadership team. I've got a copy of the gender equity strategy here. I'm happy to share it with everybody afterwards and take questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Jo. I've had a background in local government as well, and it's really quite pleasing to see the leadership that the local government sector in Victoria has taken in relation to the family violence clause. 75% of councils in Victoria have the family violence clause in their EVA. So as actually a sector, it's really quite impressive. That's world leading in terms of that level of take up, which is great. Rosie, welcome.
I'm looking at the first part of the quote we're responding to, and it's really made me think. And I'm looking around the room and I'm saying, okay, we're all of a similar age, I think. There's some younger, maybe some a little older, but I'm 52, and so I've seen a big change in communities and lifestyles, and I think we kind of need to think back to how we grew up as children. And when I grew up, I came from a small village in England, a very small village. And I look at this you know, the opening quote, which says, research shows there is a strong link between violence against women and how individuals, communities and society as a whole view the roles of men and women. So I think back as a small child. The men were the providers. My father was a farmer. He went out to work. Lunch was provided to him every day and dinner every night. He wasn't an abusive man, but that was the way it was. Women cooked and cleaned. The men went out to earn the money. And in that local village, which was just a typical village in England, and probably typical of Australian small towns, the women couldn't drive, and they certainly didn't go out to work. But there was a little bit of a movement within the local women. At some point, one got their driver's licence, and very soon they all did. That opened up a whole new world for women in this village. They could go further afield. They could get work. They had employment opportunities. So that was how I look back and see those small, ordinary women in an ordinary life starting to develop independence and make change. And I look back at that time, and I remember, was it nearly a week or so ago, there was the grand final in Melbourne, and that would be one of the largest Australian events. Most of Australians seem to like footy. I'm kind of still trying to get to like it, and I've been here 26 years. But I do like the spirit of it, and I do like the fact that people come together and they are so excited about the event. And we all watch on the TV, and we can't wait to see the entertainment. It's all a great occasion, and we embrace it. But I just want to share with you what came to me afterwards, because I've just recently had bunion surgery, and it's not glamorous, and it's very restrictive, and I've had to sit with my feet in the air for 2 weeks. So I was kind of watching the grand final, and I thought, oh, Tom Jones, wow, a blast from the past. Good old Tom is still going. And I was really, and I thought, that's great. And I really hoped that he would sing some of his old songs, because we probably remember good old Tom and Delilah and What's New Pussycat and Green Green Grasses of Home, and we kind of think it'd be good for him to hit out a few of those old numbers. So when he started to sing Delilah, I thought, great. And I'm singing along and thinking, I saw the light on the night that I passed by her window. I saw the flickering shadows of love on her blind. She was my woman. As she deceived me, I watched and went out of my mind. My, Delilah. Why, Delilah? I could see that girl was no good for me, but I was lost like a slave that no man could free. At break of day, when that man drove away, I was waiting. I crossed the street to her house, and she opened the door. She stood there laughing. I felt the knife in my hand, and she laughed no more. Blah, blah, blah. So before they come to break down the door, forgive me, Delilah. I just couldn't take any more. And I think, good old Tom, I was singing along to that song. So where have we got to? We've got to a point where I hope we can now start looking at good old songs that are actually about killing our partners and start to recognise those lyrics as totally unacceptable. But we sang as a crowd on the grand final day just a week or so ago, celebrating lyrics about a woman being murdered by her intimate partner. So we have a long way to go, because I don't know how many people noticed the lyrics of that song. And it was only while I was starting to sing about a knife, I kind of thought, hang on, this is a bit odd. Particularly when I've just living through my ex-partner losing control of me and finally using a knife to kill the very thing that I love, to make me suffer for the rest of my life. So that community attitude, we have a long way to go before people realise that the songs and the subtle things we've accepted as being okay, that we all start to realise and hear them for the message that they're sending out. Thank you.
Thanks, Rosie. And I'll give a plug to Gippsland Women's Health, who realised that ABC Gippsland had Kenny Rogers' song on high rotation. I think it was Ruby Comes to Town, or one of those Kenny Rogers songs. And again, it's about murdering the woman. And Women's Health Gippsland wrote to ABC Gippsland and asked them to remove it from their playlist, and they did. So it is everyone's business to keep raising this and build that collective awareness. Jennie, can I ask you to talk a little bit more about some of the barriers that you face in that online platform?
Well, thanks. Without putting too fine a point on it, the biggest barrier, which many people have addressed here today, is men. The way they come in on our threads to say not all men, which then turned into a hashtag. Even in this room, we're talking about something that is in the power of men to control and change, and this room's maybe 10% men. I saw a show on television the other week about racism in the 50s and 60s, and please excuse me if I'm using inappropriate terms, I don't mean to, but African American or black people could have sat in rooms for centuries and talked about the problems that they had. None of those problems would ever have changed until white people came on board to change the laws and to make things different, because black people didn't have the power. And things changed when white people decided that it was unfair. And I see sexism and misogyny and these violence against women as the same, that nothing will change until men are on board. And yet even amongst feminists, we argue about this. When Emma Watson did this speech launching the He for She campaign at the United Nations, a lot of feminists said, oh, you know, we don't want men talking for us, blah, blah, blah. And I do understand that, because there is a history of men coming into feminist spaces and taking over, and that's obviously completely unacceptable too. But to have men as allies, and I want to preface this very strongly, as most people would, that we don't hate men. Nobody hates men. 1% of feminists, if that, hate men. But we want men to step up more and to realise that none of these problems will be changed until this room should be 90% men. It really is their problem. So.
Thanks, Jennie. Joanne, can you talk about the strategy at Yarra and whether that infrastructure, that architecture, enables new conversations to be had at sort of the water cooler moments, the staff room conversations? Has it changed at that level?
That's a great question, because I'm a big believer that change often starts with conversations and building relationships. If you keep telling a room full of, you know, this room, but, you know, the MCG that you've got to change, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, just like Rosie said, we're not even thinking about that. We're just unconsciously singing the words to a song. Our gender equity strategy is about having conversations at the grassroots level, and not just with women, with all of our staff, and trying to build relationships, get people talking about gender equity. Not just the word gender equity, but about all the components that come together with that, such as, you know, unconscious bias, flexible working policies, family violence, and providing support to each other. So, and looking out, are you okay? Keeping, you know, caring for people, wanting more women in leadership roles so that we can actually start to help shape the organisation and provide a balance of views. And one thing that the gender equity strategy, just developing the gender equity strategy has done, has made it okay to talk about these things. And it's brought it into the divisional management meetings, it's brought it into the managers' meetings. It's wonderful to see a director, a male director, who actually comes up and comes to the gender equity and says, I've been thinking about this, what about this, what about that? And next minute, you know, he's setting up a support group for his women in his division, and his division has something like about, terrible to say, about 20% women. That's the infrastructure division. Next minute, you've got a senior woman appointed as a senior engineer, the first ever at Yarra. And then you've got a number of women at the depot. Now, we have a number of women in administrative roles at the depot. It's a very male environment at the depot. But all of a sudden, we've got women actually out on the road, and they're actually experiencing issues as well. But this strategy helps us support them and support a new way of thinking.
The women in the construction roles on the roads has been really noticeable around metropolitan Melbourne, which it's so pleasing to walk past a building site and see women and men in equal numbers.
Can I just say that you just can't throw a woman into those roles because it needs a whole range of not only support for them, but actual cultural change and awareness well before you do that. And we're still learning as well. We haven't got it right yet, but we've started that journey.
So, Rosie, you talked about, you know, one woman driving and the village moving on. How do we get people excited, do you think, about this issue? How do we motivate men to engage in this issue and for women to have the moral courage and the strength to have this conversation proudly and strongly? I know Bob and Scott last night and others have talked about, you know, patriarchy is the problem here, but we all need to, I guess, without going softly on eggshells, but work with what we've got. How do we motivate the numbers to get them on board?
Well, I think one thing that I think women have got really going for them is we network and support each other brilliantly. We have all got great friends. Women are very strong because of the female support systems that we intuitively build around us. And I think that, you know, a conference like this, as I understand it to be the first of its kind, you know, I come from a corporate background. This kind of, you know, a conference would not be unusual. So the very fact that we've now got a conference discussing the prevention of violence will only set the standards for future conferences. And I think, you know, there's a lot of opportunity now for women to feel stronger and more empowered as a victim, because we are starting to, I believe, hopefully I'm helping, put the onus of shame onto the perpetrator so that victims can actually understand that they are supported rather than judged and criticised. So we've still got a long way to go, but I'm very hopeful that that female strength will continue to build as we learn how to support and empower victims rather than judge them and criticise them. Mm-hmm. So that's, I think, really important. But how do we engage with men? That has been something that I've kind of tried to look at. I've done a lot of speaking since Luke died, and I've looked at, you know, within the audiences, the different forums and speaking arenas I've been to, and it's mostly female. But there have been some instances where there have been a lot of men, and I think that, you know, I've got my ideas about that, but I think sporting groups play an enormous part because they're involved at a really junior level, senior levels, local communities. And their whole, you know, male culture really has a strong focus on sport. So I think it's engaging with organisations and cultures where men really identify strongly, and through educating those men who are keen to do their bit. They really are. It's about engaging with them and working with them for their influence, I think.
Rosie, can I just say, you said you hoped you were making a difference. That when you took on Joe Hildebrand, that made such a difference to all of us. That was so. Yeah, that's also part of it, isn't it? Is just taking on men in the media and men saying things like that, and we're all so appreciative of you doing that.
Well, that was a really. I think, poor old Joe, because he must have copped a huge backlash about that comment. He still stood by his comments. He was just sorry to upset me, which was absolute bullshit, because I was upset because I was angry. But I think he drove home that message that is not just shared by men, but also by some women who don't understand that to choose to leave a relationship is complex. We all know that, and we also, not everybody does understand the degree of risk associated with removing yourself from a violent relationship, and I'm testimony to that. So I think that, if you go on Google and go back and re-look at the Joe Hildebrand comment, it's very useful in training videos, I think, because it just captures that kind of stupid comment for eternity. So thanks to Joe. I think he pushed the cause a long way.
Rosie, can I ask you to also reflect on the journey that you've been on and what you're really conscious of now that you weren't kind of mindful of back then?
Look, I didn't come from any kind of family violence background as a child. I don't even remember noticing any family violence within the village that I grew up in, certainly not with immediate family and friends. So whether I was naive and just didn't notice or just didn't know. But I found myself in an abusive relationship with my ex-partner and the father of Luke. I didn't know how to handle it. I actually didn't understand what the forms of violence were. So you're talking about 12 years ago now. I guess I just thought that violence is when somebody hit you, and I didn't understand the other forms of violence. So where I look back now, I'm very clear. I also didn't realise that it wasn't my fault, that actually whether I nagged, whether I was grumpy, I never caused it, and it was never acceptable. So where I'm at now, and where I was perhaps in January, before Luke got killed, I was probably at the strongest I've been in a long, long time, because when you are recovering from an abusive relationship, I think it's fair to say you don't bounce, into an empowered position. It takes years to rebuild your self-esteem, confidence, and self-respect. And I think it's like all of us, we sometimes don't know how far we've fallen. It's only when we start to really feel empowered and confident again that we begin to realise how affected we were. So how I feel now, I feel incredulous that people do recognise that what I'm able to say does make a difference, but I feel in a very strong place. Thank God, because no one would want to be tested as much as I'm being tested right now. And the overwhelming thing that people say to me, what are you going to do in the future, or what are your plans? And I think I can't look that far ahead, because Luke isn't with me. So the strength that you show is just getting through each day.
And it doesn't end. What is overwhelming is that this is a life sentence.
Yeah.
And you have got to work out how you move forward and how you find a sense of purpose and meaning. And so I feel that that's come to me. Now that here's the good box, I've got tissues. Tissues and toilet rolls. I'm still using them from when Luke died. I said to people, flowers would be nice, but no, they brought me toilet rolls. No, I got flowers as well. But yeah, so I think that's what, it is a journey. We're all on a journey of growth, a journey of learning. You never stop learning, you never stop growing. And that's the same journey we all share. And it's a vision of a life that we would like for everyone to be able to live safely, with respect. And that's why we're all here and involved, I'm sure, in this family violence space, because we want everybody and every woman and every child not to have to live in fear. It's a basic human right that we should be living safely in our homes. I get really sick of the only solutions being offered are more counselling. Well, if the fucking perpetrator stopped being violent, I wouldn't need the fucking counselling. I'm sorry.
Your contribution here today is greatly appreciated.
Thank you. Don't tell anybody I swore.
Yeah. Look, you've touched on, I want to finish with a question for each of our panellists around the steel that keeps them going and their vision. What's the vision for your continued effort in this space, and where you'd like to see, what impacts and you'd like to see from the work that you're doing. Jennie, do you want to talk about where you'd like to see this work go from Destroy the Joint?
Okay, thanks. We basically see Destroy the Joint as a media organisation. We don't write the content, but we post the content. And as Gail's so eloquently said, the media is run mostly by men, for men. So violence against women needs men on board, but also women at the table. Simple things annoy me now that didn't used to before I worked for Destroy the Joint, like turning the television on and every single panel show is a token woman. We should all be doing things like just refusing to watch television until there's equal representation on Q&A and all those different panel shows. Little things like that could make a difference. But also to see that men are hurt by all of this too. I have twin sons who are 20. They both happen to be very gentle and creative boys, and I feel like they're very damaged by society because there's an expectation on them to be a certain way that they don't want to be. So they aren't free to be who they are any more than women are free to be who they are, and that's a big message for men as well. We like to think we educate men on our threads. They come in maybe to attack us, and if we get people talking to them on the threads, quite often men will say, oh, you've really taught me something today. So we like to think there's value in that. We'd like to hope that you'd all like Destroy the Joint on Facebook and Twitter and follow our posts, because obviously as these sorts of organisations grow, then these sorts of messages can get out. And yeah, it is a space that's not managed by men, probably one of the few. We have 5 administrators. When we talk, we all can see how we were attracted to working with Destroy the Joint because we've all encountered a lot of sexism in our careers. We have a journalist, we have a surgeon, an executive, an advertising business owner, and I work in driver training, which is one of the most sexist things that you can possibly work in on the planet. So we all talk about that, and that sort of informs our continuing anger and our wish to change these problems. So, yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Jennie. Joanne?
Gosh, I'd like to see a time where local government actually doesn't need a gender equity strategy, that's part of the conversation of everyday life, that we see massive cultural change where violence against women is eliminated, that we provide a respectful work environment and community, that we have more women leaders, and that unconscious bias is eliminated, that we, you know, in a few years' time, hopefully, particularly at Yarra, by the time we've rolled out this strategy, I hope to see some massive cultural change there. But I think it's a journey that you'll need to continue to keep working on. It may take generations, unfortunately, but it's something that we're, committed to at Yarra, and I really hope that other organisations and councils and just people in general will take up the fight as well.
Thanks. And Rosie, you've got the foundation.
Yeah, I've got the foundation. And look, I just want to say to Gail how much I really enjoyed listening to you this morning. I learnt a lot. It just reinforces what you know, but it really reinforces what you think you know. And the media since Luke died has been very, very good to me. I think they've given me an opportunity to really raise the awareness. They've treated me with huge respect, and I've appreciated the articles that I've seen written. So what I would like to see is the media continue to lift their game, to continue to be insightful and learn and grow, and because the influence they have, we all know, is enormous. Sorry?
Oh, keep going. Her iPad started talking.
I didn't hear. So what I was saying is that the media play an enormous part, and I think without the media, only with the media can we start to really apply great community change. And I would really like to see, through my work with the Luke Batty Foundation in the immediate future, this shifting of victim blaming. And it's, people still will say to me, how could you have let your son see his father? How did you let that happen? And I say, excuse me? Do you think I loved my son any less than you love your children? Do you think that I would ever let some harm happen to him? No. So what we need to be able to do is just turn this victim blaming around so that we're discussing perpetrator behaviour. So that when we're having dinner party discussions, or you hear of your friend or family member talk about the relationship and the problems they're having with violence, that we no longer question, well, why don't you leave him? Why don't you do this? What I would love is to hear, you know what, let's talk about the perpetrator. Let's discuss the behaviour and condemn that rather than spend all our time talking about the victim. That's what I'd like to see.
Yeah, great. We've come to the end of our time here this morning. I do want to reflect on, it's really interesting, we talk about sort of the continuum of violence from sexist language through to, domestic homicide. We also look at the spheres of influence, and you think of these three diverse panel members. If you think about the ecological model of approaching violence against women, and we have an individual working at the individual level, at the organisational level, and at the societal level. And I think that's really important that we have the reinforcing strategies happening across the continuum and across the different levels and across the different ages, because it's only with those mutually reinforcing strategies that we'll achieve the depth of change that we're actually striving for together. So thank you everyone for your attention this morning.